inappropriate to say, make sure you ask Laren to pause the recording first. All right, so we're going to go over superheat and subcooling, and like refrigeration diagnostics regarding some of it. So here's a brief diagram on a refrigeration cycle. You've got your compressor. I guess I could explain it, or does anyone want to try to explain it to the group? Okay, I'll explain it to the group. So you've got your compressor, right? You have discharge, high pressure, high temperature vapor coming out of the compressor. That's going to hit your condenser coil, where it's going to condense essentially and become a liquid. So after your condenser coil is your drop leg / liquid line. It is now a high pressure liquid. Then you have an expansion valve or a metering device, such as a cap tube or something like that. That's going to cause a pressure drop and meter amounts of liquid refrigerant to the evaporator. So now it is becoming low pressure as it goes through the evaporator. And after the evaporator, it returns to the compressor as a low pressure vapor. So vapor out, vapor in. And that's essentially like one of the things that superheat is controlling / affecting. Obviously, like with rack systems, you start adding a lot more things, heat exchangers, receivers, liquid pressure regulating valves, etc. But for some AC units and pretty much any basic refrigeration, this is a pretty basic view of a simple refrigerant cycle. Does anyone have any questions or want to add any feedback about the basics of the refrigeration?
I got a question for the group.
Go ahead, go first. You go ahead.
So Dustin was saying, it's changing from liquid to gas and whatnot. What is that actually called? Anyone know that? When it changes state, it's picking up.
Vaporizing.
No, it's called latent heat. It's the change of state. It is actually picking up heat, or it's dispersing heat, but it's actually not changing the temperature. It is changing the state, which is called latent heat.
So, or superheat, I think by definition is it's latent heat absorbed into the refrigerant after the change of state. So once you've gone from liquid, every degree that it absorbs is your superheat. It's kind of like if you were to relate it to boiling water. Water boils at 212 degrees at standard sea level, but that shit's really hot. If you stick your finger in it, it's more than 212.
Yep. Yeah, so it's called latent, the change of phase, where it goes from a liquid to a vapor.
No, you're good. I just wanted to ask Dustin, is it a good idea to charge liquid refrigerant into the suction line of the compressor?
On this little diagram, probably not that much.
What would happen if you put
how close you are to the compressor too, I mean, you should always charge via like the liquid line, but to a certain extent you start to equalize pressures. Like on a rack system, like you have enough pipe and enough distance and enough volume that, I've seen people do it, but in theory, you're supposed to charge via the liquid side. And you can accomplish that by reducing your liquid pressure, right? Pumping the system down. If you close your receiver service valve at your receiver and keep your system down, your liquid line after the receiver is going to increase pressure anyways, but you're going to allow it to go through a cycle. So start changing that. You allow it to vaporize actual vapor before hitting the compressor.
There it is.
Or dumping liquid, the suction of a small, it's like self-contained unit. You're probably gonna send so much liquid to the compressor, and the compressors aren't designed to pump liquid. They're both to pump vapor in and push it back out.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah. So then there's also, it goes into knowing the state of the refrigerant too. Like Dustin was talking about the state of it, but like when it comes out of the compressor, it's a high pressure, high temperature. It goes through the condenser. It changes from a high temperature, high pressure gas to a high temperature, high pressure liquid, and so on. So that's another thing you need to know is what state it should be in, what temperature or pressure it should be at what point in your refrigeration circuit.
What are you saying, Travis?
I was gonna say a rule of thumb I always taught, and I think maybe to like what I think it was Jalen, right, asking that question. So a smaller system like this, if you were charging it and you're from a vacuum, you want to charge it in the liquid, right? You're gonna balance out your pressures, but say you didn't get the full charge into it. Charging liquid in the suction after it's running, yes, but don't go over 20 PSI than what the suction pressure is.
Correct. Yep.
Hey, can I add something too, really
Want
quick?
to elaborate more on that aspect.
You want
Some condensers.
slowly because you don't want to take out the valves on that compressor.
There you go. I was looking for you're gonna slow the compressor if you overcharge it with liquid, especially off of a fresh vacuum. You never want to charge the system strictly liquid into the suction, only the liquid side of the compressor.
Charging, do you guys understand which one's a discharge and which one's a suction? I mean,
Shane, go ahead, and then we'll address Travis's question.
I was going to say that some condensers, not all, but there's an accumulator right before the compressor too. And so that thing's job basically is to trap liquid and only suck the boiled off vapor refrigerant out of the top of the can. So sometimes if you got an accumulator too, correct me if I'm wrong, but then you don't have to worry so much about liquid getting into the compressor, so long as you don't fill the jar full.
And like Travis said, it really depends on what you're doing. You know, if you're starting fresh with an empty system, you're obviously not going to put the full charge in via the suction. Dump it in the liquid. Once it's up and running, if you need to add additional gas, slowly meter it through the suction. And we have a lot of new people here and people from different industries and people that have maybe not really touched anything from like a service perspective, but does everyone understand like the discharge and suction line aspect of it? Like how to identify it, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Discharge is not the same as liquid.
And just remember too, during all this, there's no wrong answers because as a team, we're only as good as like our least amount of knowledge. So I remember when I first started, I probably asked for like the first 2 weeks if the discharge was the hot one or the cold one. And, you know, so if anyone doesn't know these things, you know, feel free to ask for an explanation. Going on to our next slide. Superheat, like Shane was talking about earlier, that latent heat, it's an increase in temperature above saturation. Some key things about superheat. Proper superheat ensures liquid refrigerant is boiled off prior to returning the compressor. Low superheat equals too much liquid going to the compressor. Refrigerant is not boiled off. This is flood back or overfeeding, a valve stuck open or not set correctly. There are other things which I think might be on this slideshow that cause, you know, flood back / superheat other than just your expansion valve. Going into just a few things, just in case it's not on one of my other slides. If you think about it, what are some things that guys can think of that would cause low superheat other than like an expansion valve adjustment? Because keep in mind, you're not always, I mean, expansion valves are usually set, you know, pretty well. They don't usually require frequent adjustments unless there's something wrong with it or there's something wrong with the system.
If EPR is too low.
So one thing Cody said, rack system,
Non-condensables.
EPR is too open. If it's running at a colder temperature than it needs to be. What else do you guys got?
Also, if you have a kink in a line causing a restriction, that can almost make it like a second expansion valve almost. That can also affect the superheat.
So in that scenario, would you say you'd have a low superheat or a high superheat if you were causing an extra restriction?
Probably a higher superheat because it's going to be running higher pressure.
Yep. Well, not necessarily just higher pressure, but if you just forget the pressure for a second, even you're causing an additional restriction, right? So you're not sending enough liquid to your evaporator. So it's going to boil off really quickly and have a high superheat. Christian said airflow. That's a big one. If you have fan motors out or your coils iced up, you really remove the effectiveness of your evaporator being able to evaporate that refrigerant and to change its state. If you don't have fans moving air through that coil or you don't have good airflow, there's nothing to allow that change of state to take place. That's really common on iced up cases is flood back because you're no longer utilizing your evaporator the way it's designed to. High superheat, like Justin said. Oh, go ahead.
Hey, Dustin. Shane and I both found out that if someone doesn't put nitrogen through your system as they're welding, you'll clog up the TXV screens too, and they'll create some funny superheats.
Yep. High superheat. I feel like both, Laren and Matt probably touch on this. It's probably the most, or sorry, Laren and Jalen. High superheat. There's not enough liquid going through the coil. It's boiling off too quickly. You have a starved coil or underfeeding. So that's like really common scenarios and good examples of high superheat. If you do have a restriction, that could be a kinked line, that could be a plugged filter dryer, etc. But like Laren said too, a lot of expansion valves have screens on them. And a lot of those screens can be removed. And sometimes the ones that can't be removed or don't have them, it could plug up the internals. If that valve can't open all the way or can't feed enough refrigerant, then you're going to end up with a high superheat.
Share it to the chat. Cody's gonna send a photo of one that he just came across.
Cody's going to send a photo on the meeting for everyone too of one he came across. So that should be coming through shortly.
What about the location of the screen? Are they internal, external? How do you access them?
Can you take a 5/8 wrench right there and pop it up?
Has everyone seen a screen on an expansion valve?
Yes.
Open it up,
Yes.
let it come down.
Sometimes it's right there external to the body and easy to access. And then sometimes you get those awful ones where it's actually built in and you have to take the whole thing apart.
Such a precious iron, I thought those too.
And sometimes on a Danfoss valve, you think there's a screen in it, so you take it apart to realize it's just a gasket and then you're screwed.
Make sure you use 2 wrenches, not just 1.
Matt said
Justin,
to
I
make
have-
sure 2 wrenches, not just 1, to back it up if you're ever doing that.
I wanted to touch on back to the point. I forgot who just addressed it, but to when you're welding with nitrogen, like if you don't weld with nitrogen, but you perform a triple evac, like charge with nitrogen, pull it in the vacuum, pull in the vacuum, charge it with nitrogen, and then pull it in another vacuum, won't you still remove the soot from the lines since nitrogen displaces the oxygen from it?
Probably not. But I mean, like honestly, like a lot of us, when you're doing like small repairs, like it's a good idea just to flow just a little bit of nitrogen, but it's really important on like big installs. It sure sucks to have construction hand you over a supermarket and then end up with plugged liquid filters, plugged suction filters, plugged expansion valves, etc. A vacuum essentially is really good for removing moisture, but I mean, you're not always going to suck everything out. It's a lot easier just to let you kind of blow it out, I guess.
Well, and I think the
But that first
triple
thing is you
evac
always plan
is
ahead if you're not going to do those big jobs. Sorry, if you're going to do those big jobs, you got to pull the screen there on the external, and then we'll do all your welding, then sweep, and then put your screens back in for the vacuum and the nitrogen.
Yeah, and also on top of that, Larry, and that's a good point, but also whenever you're installing an expansion valve, wrap them. Wrap them with wet rags, whatever you got to, because you'll just burn those things up, especially if the screens are in them. And I've even done some that have been in some tight spots that I just felt more comfortable pulling the screen out to weld it in place. Shane, what were you going to say?
Triple evac, the purpose of that is to achieve the deepest possible vacuum. So like in a lot of more humid climates, or even just on a really muggy day, or if a system's been open atmosphere for too long, when you pull a vacuum that's negative 29.92 inches water column, I'm pretty sure that's the same pressure as outer space. So if there's any moisture in there, a lot of it does get sucked out and boiled off through your vacuum, but a lot of it supposedly will crystallize and freeze and get stuck in the oil. So the reason why you break your vacuum with dry nitrogen is to bring the pressure back up and basically boil off any moisture that's left in the system, and then suck that out, and then boil it off again, and then suck that out. And then eventually you'll see that your micron gauge will kind of go stable and you'll hit your 500 microns or whatever. So it's just a simple one evac. It's sometimes, in a lot of cases, just not enough. You're not pulling enough of the moisture out.
Thank you, Shane. I would like just to expand while we're on this page, both high and low superheat. Don't just assume that if you have either of those scenarios that adjusting the valve is the fix. I've seen a lot of guys, and I've even made that mistake myself, of having high superheat on a coil and start opening the valve, open it all the way, is not adjusting. Finally, someone tells me to pump it down and pull the screen. It's dark and dirty in there, and then I have to reset my superheats all over again because I didn't check that first. So, you know, if you have situations where it's high or low superheat, the answer isn't always adjusting the valve.
Do that last.
There's also a picture on here to kind of give you a rough idea of how to properly set or check superheat. So you've got your suction gauge on there, right? It's 58.5 PSI, which according to your PT chart converts to 33 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you take your temp clamp and you put it on your suction line near your expansion valve bulb. You have a line temp of 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The difference between those two numbers is 7 degrees. Now, before we get too far into it, superheat and subcooling are kind of swapped. So with superheat, it's always your line temp minus your suction pressure converted or your saturated temp. For subcooling, it's your saturated temp minus your line temp. Does that make sense?
What lines?
Yeah.
I just said what lines.
Here's a fun question. Can you have a negative superheat?
Yes.
No. You'll read negatives on your You'll read negatives on your meter. Your calculation will be negative, but it's in theory impossible to have lower than 0. You either have some or you don't. You will read negative numbers, but you don't actually have negative superheat. At least that's what I was taught, but that's why we're having this, because I'm sure we're all taught different things.
I've never ran
For
into
some,
that number, but if you run into a negative, does that mean it's just 0, or what? Does that mean, what would you say is going on in that situation?
Well, whether negative or too low.
So if you ever check out the engineering side of it, you got the empathy chart, and so you'll notice that anything in one left side of the thing is all vapor. So once you become a vapor, you turn into a saturated, then you turn into a liquid. So your superheat is anything above any heat above saturation. So you have sometimes you'll have to check it. I'll have to show you an empathy chart and how those work. Those are kind of fun. They show you exactly what you're talking about when you're saying superheat, where it crosses the line for which refrigerant, and then same thing with subcool.
I have a question, and I want everybody to reply into the chat. Who uses a meter with a K-type probe or clamp and does the calculations yourself with your gauges, or who's just watching what their Filtese digital gauges is reading? Cody's raising his hand. So reply in the chat in this group. What method do you use to check your superheat?
How do you reply?
If there's a little thing at the top of your screen that says chat, you can click on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, digital, plans that you set on. Read it, and then it tells you from that.
So Chris says analog should always be learned first. I do both. Simmons says I calculate. That's how I was taught. Jay Lynn Gordon says field piece. Dylan says I used to calculate with analogs, but have been using field piece probes for a while now. Brody says both, depending on type of refrigerant. I don't use my digital on all refrigerant. Ken says both.
So the guys that do both, I'm just curious, because I'm analog. I just use my meter and my regular gauges. But have you ever compared the two?
My field piece to my math.
Yeah.
Sometimes the field piece is off. It's off by like two, 3. Mine at least. I think they're all very.
Plus with the field piece, different apps you can use, you don't have to use the field piece app. And I get another one that's more accurate, yeah.
So I would highly suggest to learn it like Chris said first, analog,
Same gauges.
and kind of watch what your temperature's doing. And also that way too, you guys will be able to see when your expansion valve is closing and opening, because you're gonna watch your temperature rise, and when it opens, it's gonna drop. That lowest number is when you do your calculation.
Yep.
Okay,
That's what I was gonna say next too is, you know, obviously your expansion valve, it's metering refrigerant, right? So it is adjusting. And too many guys go in, they throw their temperature clamp on or their fill piece stuff, they get their pressure and they see what it is in that moment, right? Oh, it's 20 degrees superheat, it's too high. I'm gonna start opening the valve. Superheats are kind of like ice machines in the aspect you have to be patient and you have to give it time because your valve's gonna fluctuate. I was always taught to go off of my lowest superheat reading, my lowest pressure, my lowest temperature, because at any given state of that valve, you're ensuring you're not going to be flooding. If you set it in the average, it's going to be higher, it's going to be lower, and because it's going to be lower, you're going to have moments where it is flooding back. So as a general rule of thumb, if you watch your valve open and you watch your valve close, and one time it might open and it might go to, 5 degrees, but the next cycle it might go to, 3 degrees. So like obviously in that scenario, that's a 2-degree superheat difference. And so if you go off your low end, your low swing each time, when you have a basis to like build upon, you're checking the same number every time. You're checking the valve and its open state, and you can kind of adjust from there.
I got something on that.
So, oh yeah, I was going to mention something too.
On the swing, I think different refrigerants say, you know what I'm saying?
the glide, whatever.
Yes.
Corey?
All right. So, does everyone know what a refrigerant glide is? Anyone? Anyone don't know what it is?
I do not know what that is.
All right. So, when two different, like a lot of refrigerants nowadays are blends of 2, 3, 4 different types of refrigerants. So, with each one of these blends and each one of the refrigerants that's in these blends at X pressure, it's going to be a different temperature. So I know the field piece, when we're talking about doing our digital gauges, the field piece, it will go base the superheat calculation off the midpoint of that glide. So like if you look at a PT chart or that actual refrigerant, it'll show you like this swing of temperatures for the refrigerant. So field piece goes off the middle. I want to say testo goes off the low glide. So I know I never set superheats with my testo gauges. They are horrible. So that's just one thing to remember too.
Does everyone understand that, or do we need to go into more details?
So Shane showed me on Tuesday, earlier this week, that you set your superheat like towards the end, I guess, of the cycle, like once it's almost satisfied, which I guess is then the lowest temperature or pressure, which I hadn't been taught before. I'd kind of just been taught to adjust it at any point. And I've even seen guys like open the cooler door to like let the box heat up to like adjust the TXV. So that is definitely good information. And if I said anything wrong there, correct me.
If you think about it though, like let's say you just de-iced the case, right, and you just started it back up, it's going to have a high load on it. It's going to be quite a ways from set point. That valve is going to be open more in that time period than it would be under normal operating conditions. So you get a more accurate reading the closer you are to like being at normal operating conditions.
What I always did was within 10 degrees of my satisfied temperature. If my box freezer or something like that.
Can everyone hear Travis?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, here.
That's all I was just saying. Is I would base off a rule of thumb of what 10 degrees of set point. So if your set point's at 35 degrees, you more than likely can start checking your superheat around that 45-degree mark if it's a cooler, right? But you're watching it 3 times, like Cody said, and I don't think you said it loud enough, but a rule of thumb is to at least watch it 3 times.
So if it hits your load number 3 times where you want it, you're good to go. Don't touch the valve, button everything up.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Christian, yep.
I was kind of curious why we would wait that long if your expansion valve, depending on how it's set, whatever it is. I mean, your pressure, your temperature of your bowls versus your spring pressure is always still gonna be the same regardless of.
No, because the valve will hunt. The valve's constantly hunting.
Shouldn't, it's not.
It's always hunting. Always.
Yeah.
That bulb, that valve can constantly move it. It'll move 10,000 times.
Right, but it's still gonna move up and down based off the outlet, temperature on your suction line.
But depending on the gas, 448 is a gas that's got a huge swing. That valve.
With high drive.
You gotta
Yeah.
also remember too, is when that,
Great work is big too.
oh, sorry. Sorry. So you gotta remember, you wanna set your superheat when it's as close to set point as possible. Cause when it's just cycled on, it's absorbing more heat. So that valve is gonna be wider open because it's getting a hotter reading on that bulb. That's why you always set it when it's closest to your set point.
So you're suggesting
usually-
leave the door. Sorry, Rory. Are you suggesting
No.
leave the door open so that way you don't hit set point? Because once you hit that point, your machine shuts off and your compressor kicks on, and then you've got
This-
a fluctuating thing with
Yeah,
that.
it's
Yes, sir.
hard. You gotta watch your pressures. Like this is, I'm
Pressure
a very big fan of EPRs where you could set an EPR to keep that pressure where that thing's never cycling off. But that's just me. Like that's the best way to do it is if you have a constant suction pressure. But with a lot of these small fridges and smaller cases, you don't have EPRs, so it's harder. What I usually do is I'll set, instead of opening the door, if I have a cooler that's a walk-in cooler that you want set for 35 degrees, what I'll do is I'll bring that temperature down on the controller to like 32, and then I'll have a temperature probe in my box, and I'll be watching my box and be like, okay, it's at 35. What's my superheat doing? Okay, my superheat's a little high. Let's open the valve a little bit, and then when I'm done setting it, then I'll put the temperature control back to the normal set point and see what it's doing. Sorry, my girls are fighting. It's not
Like Rory said too, like when you start doing more supermarket stuff, like Walmart, for example, if you do a Walmart startup, they don't want any of their EPRs and solenoids shutting off. They want to see 100% runtime because that on and off, not doing that is an energy savings. So you can dial like supermarkets with EPRs in to such a fine point where your EPR is never turning off other than defrost. And Walmart, like for example, they won't check you out of a new store startup or a remodel startup without showing 100% runtimes. And so We're gonna go over a little bit like evaporator superheat, compressor superheat, small systems, big systems, etc. Obviously, evaporator superheat is measured at your evaporator. You can also check superheat at your compressor, right? You can do the same calculations, the same suction line temp, 6 inches from your compressor, your pressure at your compressor. But what are some differences? All these compressor manufacturers have, superheat requirements. In a supermarket, for example, low temp cases, like your freezers, are usually acceptable running 4 to 6 degrees of superheat. Medium temp, roughly 6 to 8 degrees of superheat. That doesn't mean, though, that your compressor is going to be running 6 to 8 degrees of superheat. In a supermarket, you have a lot longer line sets, a lot more distance. It's going to be gaining heat as it goes. Most compressor manufacturers don't want to see anything less than 20 to 25 degrees of superheat. So when you're checking big systems versus small systems, sometimes it's important, especially on small systems, to check your compressor superheat too. You might think you have your expansion valve dialed in, but I mean, make those one where the compressor literally sits right above the evaporator, right? There's not a lot of, heat that's going to boil off right there or whatever. So you have to ensure that your compressor is within factory range. You don't want to be flooding back your compressor, but you also want to make sure your evaporator is feeding properly. Smaller systems are going to pick up less heat as the refrigerant normally travels smaller distance. 10 degrees is a good place to start. We kind of went over, low swing, mid swing, superheat when near to design temp. Obviously, compressor superheat's higher than evap superheat. Minimum of 20 degrees of superheat. I know Matt Wiley can probably share a little bit about some of the stuff he's dealt with at Costco with being called by some of the Costco guys for low suction temps, Matt? Matt might not be listening anymore, but
So I know what you're talking about. I could kind of share it. I know what they were doing is, I believe Bob, not Bob. Is it Bob, the technician who runs? Was it Matt? Yeah, he was checking superheats, and based off of the suction temperature and the pressure readings on the EEPRs, and he was saying that this one is too high or too low based off of the temperature of the coil and whatnot, but you can't do that because of the EPRs themselves. So he was reading the temperature of the liquid or the vapor refrigerant at the compressors. But just because that temperature at the compressors is this doesn't mean that's the temperature of the coil. And I know I talked to him and I told him to tell that guy in nicer words that he can't do that and he's a retard. But I don't know if that went well. If that's what you were talking about, Dustin.
Yeah, and you just have to keep in mind too, like what the rest of the system is doing. You can't solely focus on superheat because not every supermarket EPRs are set correctly, right? So if you're down in the case checking superheat and you've got a high superheat all of a sudden, I mean, like Rory said, how he was lowering the set point. That's because you're still going off and close, or you're on a walk-in cooler at Applebee's and you're in there checking superheat and all of a sudden it's super high. Some guys just forget about the other things going on and start adjusting the valve. But if your case satisfies on temp or your thermostat satisfies and it de-energizes, all of a sudden your superheat's high because it's not feeding anymore. Just be mindful of like those scenarios before you start just adjusting valves. Because I've done that before, sitting there watching it. I have it almost dialed in. Next thing I know, it's high. And so I sit there and I start adjusting it more and I start getting frustrated and climb back on the roof and go look at the controller to find out the stupid thing went into defrost. So like keep stuff like that in mind, that if something doesn't look right, don't just start messing with the valve. Make sure it's calling for it. Make sure you're feeding refrigerant. Make sure you're not cycling on and off. I mean, superheats can take a while to set properly. If you're trying to watch 3 cycles and that thing happens to satisfy it and shut off, I mean, that throws off your readings right there. You know, like Rory mentioned, lower your set point down, force it to run 100%, ensure it's not going to go into defrost. If you're at a store like Costco or Fred Meyer, override the defrost off, override the solenoid on. But I personally have made that mistake probably more than once of trying to set superheats and have the case satisfy or go into defrost. And I made the mistake of adjusting the valve. So keep that kind of stuff in mind as well.
Someone probably already said this like at the beginning of this, but like a dirty condenser coil, that would be higher superheat, right?
So if you have a dirty condenser coil, right, you're gonna have a higher head pressure. But what does everyone think? Do you think just simply having a higher head pressure is gonna reduce the amount of flow going through the expansion valve?
No.
What is your thought, Ken? You say no. Why do you think that?
Sorry, I'm trying to do two classes at once right now, but if you got higher head pressure, you're actually going to be forcing that diaphragm open more, pushing more through. So you're probably going to get lower.
Is it 100% liquid at your expansion valve? If you've got a dirty ass condenser coil, do you have 100% liquid going to your valve, or do you have a mixture of vapor as well?
So ask
It goes to the
what-
priority of what you got to do.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Say you need your. I always was taught when like little refrigerators. Sometimes you have it, your refrigerator won't work until you clean the condenser. Then all of a sudden magic happens and the condenser works. So or the whole fridge works for little refrigerators. It's because they don't have no ports. So you try to do everything first so that the priority is make sure you have airflow, make sure your coils are clean, and then we look at pressures and things. But if you don't do those things first, pressures and temps are all off.
And if you think about the condenser too, right, it's condensing all of our vapor and making it a liquid. If our coil's dirty, we're not condensing properly. So like Shane said, we might not be sending enough liquid to the expansion valve. So you are going to probably, you know, and obviously bigger systems are going to be less affected than smaller systems. But, you know, if you are not condensing fully to a liquid, you don't have a full column of liquid at your expansion valve, there's going to be less liquid to boil off in the evaporator. So, I mean, in theory, yeah, you could have a higher superheat because you have a dirty condenser. Like Laren said, I think it was Laren, but, you know, clean coils, good airflow, fan motors working. Those are all things that are going to potentially affect and alter what your actual superheat is doing.
I'm only gonna say this because I know that Shane warned Dylan that I'm a little bit of a smartass sometimes. But the manager in me is gonna ask you the question, why are you checking your superheat before cleaning your condenser first?
That was just a general question, not towards me, right?
I'm just kidding, man.
I think it was a good question though, Dylan.
Actually,
It brought up
yeah.
a scenario that affects superheat, but doesn't necessarily control how the process of superheat works.
That would be Captain T right there.
Well, you could see the change too. So then that's data. That's good data to document and see.
But I do think that brings up a valid point for what Dylan's asking, right? But I would like, you know, let's make sure that the equipment is clean, especially because, you know, we're probably talking about like a walk-in cooler or walk-in freezer or something. You know, smaller system, like Dustin said, your larger scale stuff is not going to be affected as much. But first, like verify that your evaporator coil is clean and your condenser is clean.
Yep. Really, it's like with any service call, you know, we talk about not just fixing the issue that you find, but ensuring the entire system's operating. You might get the easiest call in the world and get there and have a burn up condenser fan motor, and you change that condenser fan motor and move on your way. But, you know, checking everything. Is your condenser clean? Is your evaporator clean? Are any other motors out? Is your defrost timer working correctly? You know, I feel like this is an area as a team we can all do better in, because we get in the habit of, we walk in the door, we see the simple problem, we fix it. Well, a week later, we get a call on the same piece of equipment and the next guy goes out and cleans the condenser. You know, take the time to, you have to understand superheat, but make sure everything else is working before you start making adjustments to expansion valves and stuff.
Was the photo taken at a costume?
Here's a photo of, you know, what may appear to be low superheat. Or someone didn't know what they were doing and sprayed liquid refrigerant all over it. I don't know, but one of those two scenarios. We talked about, you know, iced up coils. We talked about flood back. So here was just a picture that I put on here a year ago. We talked about high superheat, improper evap temp. You know, both low superheat and high superheat can cause iced up coils. The ice pattern is usually visually different. You can tell when something's starved and when something's flooded, right?
Look at the distributor.
So just because something's iced up doesn't necessarily mean it was caused by low superheat. It could have been caused by high superheat. Another thing I was taught, now I don't know if, you know, like Rory, this would be curious your opinion, but, you know, I was always taught, like on a supermarket, for example, if you're going to adjust, if you're looking at a case and you're reading a high superheat, when I first started, my service manager showed me that he always valved off the hand valve in the case, let it pump out for like 10, 15 minutes, whatever, to get all the liquid out of it, because a coil that's so overly flooded could still end up with a false high superheat. Did you hear anything like that or have any input on that?
I haven't heard anything like that. No. Sorry.
If you're ever unsure or you ever don't trust your reading, valve off your liquid line, close the hand valve in the case, pump all the refrigerant out of it, and start fresh.
It makes sense though. Now that you mentioned it, it does definitely make sense. So.
All right, Rory learned something new today.
Yes, I did. I'm always trying to learn something.
All right, so we've
Would
got.
that kind of be like kind of beef when we were?
Oh, sorry.
What's that, Ken?
So that'd be kind of like kind of beef when we didn't see the ice on the very bottom of the evaporators at first. And we're trying to set superheats. We didn't notice that little layer, and it was causing a big issue.
Well, that's because when it comes to ice on a coil like that, and it acts like insulation, so it's not going to pick up any heat. So that's pretty much, it's not going to change state. It's not going to go from a liquid to a vapor like it's supposed to. So that's why you want to make sure the coil's clear.
So for this slide here, I have to like look at my actual laptop because I can barely read what's up there. But I think what I did here was just come up with some examples of checking and adjusting superheat. So we'll just go through it quickly. Let's say we got off R404A walk-in evap, cooler evap. We're running a suction pressure of 65, which converts to about 24 degrees. Our suction line temp on the outlet of the evap near the bulb is 26 degrees. That is a 2 degree superheat, which is too low. TXV needs to be closed, which is turned clockwise, right? You close it clockwise, you open it counterclockwise, kind of like a water spigot on the side of your house. So when you turn it clockwise, you're increasing the valve spring pressure. Make small adjustments, let the valve cycle. Our new line temp is 34 degrees. Our new superheat is 10 degrees. So the biggest thing like out of that I see too is realizing that it takes time You know, you don't adjust it and get an instant new superheat reading. You don't open it 3 full turns on the first try. You know, incremental adjustment and give valve time to balance out. On the opposite side, same scenario, we got 24-degree saturated temp, 44-degree line temp, 20 degrees of superheat, it's too high. You already made sure the screen wasn't plugged and there was no restrictions and your coil's clean, etc. You decide you need to adjust the valve at this point. You're going to turn it counterclockwise, decreasing valve spring pressure, small adjustments, let it make it cycle. New line temp of 34 degrees, superheat now at 10 again. Oh, looks like we got a service call. All right, walk in.
Is that Butterburst?
No, I don't. I just found that on the internet like a year ago. So I put this in there because it's kind of comical, right? It kind of pokes fun at how sometimes we don't always do the best job, but also is like a good example. So you arrive and find the walk-in freezer. What did you do? Well, you melted all the ice with hot water and you made sure the drain was clear. Then you verified defrost operation. Your heaters are pulling the prop.
My back hurts. Get off my
Fan
back.
delays termination, which is working. Also opens and closes it as supposed to.
Why are you back?
You did what all of us good. All the basics. You verified proper pressures. You're running 25 PSI for 404, which is a -10 saturated temp. Your discharge pressure is running at 312, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The condenser is dirty, so you do clean it. It's only 80 degrees outside. You are now running 272 PSI, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and your sight glass is clear. So you're like being super thorough on this service call if you don't want to call back. Now you're going to pump the system down because you're already on the roof. You're going to verify the low pressure control is cutting out prior to running into a vacuum. I'm sure we all have probably seen those systems where the low pressure control is not ever turning off because it's either bad or not set right. So even during defrost, that compressor just runs and runs and runs and runs and runs and never shuts off. So we took that step, we verified that. We even went to the extent of verifying our receiver level using the torching method. Our sight glass was clear, which was great, but we closed our liquid line on the outlet of the receiver. We let the whole system pump down into the receiver, which we already did to verify our low pressure control works. And we took our MAP gas torch and heated the side of the receiver, and you can actually feel that temperature difference. If you start at the bottom of the receiver, it's going to be cool because that's where all the liquid's at. As you move your hand up, that receiver is going to reach a point where it's warm or hot again. That's a good indication of how much refrigerant you have in your receiver. Some manufacturers make those shitty receivers that are covered in insulation, so you can't do that. But in this scenario, we were able to. Our receiver is about 3/4 of the way full. We're good with that in the summertime. We know there's enough refrigerant. And we know that when the temp drops in January and it's -10 outside, we still got enough gas in there where it's not going to act like it's low on charge. So we feel good about it. Then we let the manager know that we cleaned the condenser and asked them to be better about closing the door because that seems to be the most common write-ups whenever something's running warm. Manager doesn't keep the door closed. You filled out the perfect invoice and you provided top-notch customer service, all thanks to your first few weeks here at Coltech University. Job is complete and checked out with your dispatcher. So generally speaking, the tech on this call went through a lot of stuff. They did a pretty good job. They were pretty thorough. They checked a lot of different things.
Did it just melt the ice?
That I'm sure we all have been guilty of not doing at times. So honestly, if I read that in someone's write-up, I'm thinking, wow, like they really checked a lot of stuff. So you think you're good, right? You go home, crack open a cold beer, spend time with the family, and he's like, brushing your hands, like job well done. Well, then Marissa calls you 1 week later, call back that same walk-in freezer. So again, I can't read this, so I'll just read it out loud on my computer screen.
I have one
return to
question
the
real quick.
Yep.
Would Travis, after reading all that, call us up and say, why did you clean the condenser instead of the evaporator?
Maybe.
Just on the slide, it said you told the manager that you cleaned the condenser and shut the door.
Well, you did clean the condenser because it
I
was
know.
dirty, remember?
Yeah,
It had high head pressure. So now, 1 week later,
But Brad, to your point, yeah, I'm asking you why you didn't drop that pan and clean the evaporator coil on the inside. So
correct.
thank you.
what I should have put in there was, per Travis, I also dropped the pan, cleaned the drains, everything. But in comparison to what has happened on some of our service calls, that was a pretty good write-up.
Yep.
Marissa calls you a week later and says, I need you to go back to that store. However, when you get back, this time the customer's not happy to see you again. And you already know what's ahead because you literally just de-iced this freezer a week ago. You complete the same process as you did before, right? You de-iced it, you verified all the basics again. Even though you verified them and felt good a week ago, you're starting to second guess yourself. So you check all that same stuff again. However, this time, after doing all that stuff, you let the box pull back down to temp, right? Because do we leave the job? Do we say, hey, your freezer's running, it's at 40 degrees and dropping?
No,
No,
you wait.
you wait, you watch it satisfy, you make sure it turns off, you make sure it turns on. So in this scenario, you're doing that. So now your freezer's down at 10 degrees, 0 degrees, pretty dang close to a freezer temperature. So now you decide, you know what, I'm going to do the one thing I didn't do last time. I'm going to check my superheat. You check your superheat, you find that your superheat is high at 20 degrees. You pump the system down and pull the TXV screen because you want to make sure it's clean before making adjustments since you have a high superheat. The screen is plugged, you clean it and return it to operation. While you wait for the box temp to drop, you go and double check everything in the condenser. Since the screen was dirty, you decide to take a temp drop across your liquid line filter dryer. You noticed a slight temp difference. You explain to the manager what was found and you recommend replacing the dryer. They ask for a price, so you build an estimate, include all the proper prices, and they approve it. Now it looks like you're coming back tomorrow on day 3 to change the dryer because it's 4:30 and dinner's getting cold. So your mistake, I know it's all just fun and games, but your mistake a week ago is not a flaw, it's a learning experience. I think, like I said, that was a pretty dang good write-up considering everything that was done. But now you took one extra step. You checked one more thing that you didn't check before. And superheat, you can tell a lot about how a system is operating. Like I said, this was presented to the entire company. So I put some like things in there telling people how they were valuable assets and this learning experience can be tough and they make us all better. But it's true, right? I mean, I know a lot of experienced techs that would have done that initial write-up. And I probably would have even at some point done that initial write-up. But it's just showing that one extra thing, that one thing we didn't check on our first visit could have been, a primary cause or part of the cause as to why the system was operating the way that it should.
So I have you go back and I do have a few questions that may be on some other guys' minds as well. So go back to your first service call. Please. So my first question is why am I melting the ice with hot water and making sure that the drain is clear? Why don't I just shut it off and come back tomorrow?
Because the
They
customer
might have
That's so you can get to the next call.
the customer needed their freezer working, their corporate office was coming the next day, they approved the overtime.
We got a lot of guys on the call. I'm gonna tell you right now, don't shut systems off and go back to the next day type stuff. They had this product in here, they had this freezer, this cooler, whatever. You need a pump and 55-gallon trash can because you can't haul a hose in there. Like, let's make it happen. Let's do whatever we can to take care of the customer. So that right there, melting the ice with hot water. Let's do it. And it can get messy. I'm sure a lot of guys have experienced, so like, I've had to like squeegee floors before, and And then my next question is on pumping the receiver down and torching it. How do I know what's full? Roughly 3/4 all the time?
No.
Depending on
summer,
Yeah.
in the winter.
Why? I don't know.
Summer charge and winter charge.
What about the guys on teams? I mentioned when we were talking about this, I mentioned that when you check your receiver, obviously it's hot outside, right? It's 80 degrees. We checked and we said it's 3/4 full. I also said that we know that when the temperature drops and it snows tomorrow, we know there's enough refrigerant. So what happens when the temperature is cold outside? Are you going to have more or less refrigerant in your receiver?
Less. You're using more of it.
Less.
Okay, so why all
Well,
you guys
when
think
it's
it's
cold?
less? Matt said because you're going to use more of it. What else do we have for why there's less refrigerant in the wintertime?
I know as the temperatures drop, your pressure is going to drop.
Okay, and if your pressure is lower, right, you get to a certain point, doesn't refrigerant start stacking? So if it's hot outside,
Yes.
you're not going to be stacking refrigerant in your condenser, right? But when it's winter time, you're going to be stacking refrigerant in your condenser, which is why a lot of units have headmasters, fan cycle controls, etc. So when it's
Hey,
cold
can I
outside,
interrupt you for
you're
a sec?
stacking refrigerant. So your receiver level in the winter time is going to be lower because some of that gas is stacked in the condenser. So if you were to do this same process in the winter time when you're checking your receiver and you torch it and make sure it's warm, you want about 50% or half full receiver. In the summertime, about 3/4 of the way receiver. You want to ensure that you don't want to just clear the sight glass in the summer, because as soon as it gets cold and that gas starts stacking in the condenser, you no longer have enough refrigerant to keep a full column of liquid at your expansion valve.
So if it's summertime and I'm running
Also, you
high,
gotta be aware, if you're at a Costco, do not fill it 3/4 full. They have a 5-minute, they have a limit that they want to keep that receiver at 5. So there's certain customers that have critical speculations that they need to have, because we don't want to lose, when they lose a charge, they don't want to lose 90,000 gallons or pounds of refrigerant. They just want to lose the minimum. So beware of where you're at too when you say
Well,
that.
keep in mind, this example, keep in mind that this example is primarily for single systems. Usually on rack systems, you have multiple systems. Some systems are going into defrost, other systems are satisfied. So you don't need that. And most supermarkets will have an actual gauge so you know your receiver level. It will fluctuate a little bit, especially if the or the split valve's not working or the fans aren't programmed right. But like in this specific example, this is, say you're working on a walk-in freezer at Applebee's with a single system with a small receiver on the unit. You know, things that are more critically charged, that those ambient conditions are going to really affect the system. You know, all those new units that they make with 2 fans, they run constantly and no fan cycle switches. They sit there and run fans nonstop in the wintertime, you know, stuff like that. But just keep in mind that if you are working on a system, a small single system like this, that has a receiver, that you don't just clear the sight glass, because that receiver level and the amount of liquid you have going to your expansion valve will alter or change with your ambient conditions.
so during the winter it's 50%, during the summer it's 3/4, or am I backwards?
No, that's right.
That's right, because during the winter it's stacking in the condenser.
Yep. If
So-
you fill it 3/4, 80% full in the winter time, it's gonna get hot outside in the summertime. All that gas is gonna stop stacking. You're gonna be overcharged and probably going off on high head pressure.
Would that cause my coil to freeze up?
What?
Overcharged?
Pressure up.
I guess.
The compressor will fail before.
I've seen some compressors have like a pressure release. They were older, but it was on a residential split system, but you could hear it hiss.
I'm calling EPA.
I don't know if it would have time to ice up or if it would just be running too high of head to really do
Popping
anything.
off high head pressure. Okay.
You pop
All right.
And also like Travis was saying about just taking care of the customer, you know, in my career, 12, 13, 14 years, I have never shut a walk-in system off to de-ice overnight. Never ever shut a walk-in down to de-ice. Too much product, nowhere to put it. But it is important though to communicate though, like with customers, like what's involved, overtime, not overtime, etc. Because some places you got a little tiny salad cooler, they might not want us to stay all night and keep the store open for us when they can put it in the walk-in. But something like this, a walk-in that's the primary source of all their product, just do whatever is necessary to take care of them. Christian?
Where's the filter dryer go, before or after the sight glass? Why?
I've seen it both.
Curious, some guys think it's one way or the other.
Yeah, I've seen guys with the filter dryer after the sight glass. Filter dryer is restricted, right? There's nothing coming out of the filter dryer. It's all stacked up behind the filter dryer. Sight glass looks clear, like it's running great. Actually, one of our guys did it in Reno, kept saying they couldn't find a leak when I was living over there. Kept adding gas to a little single door ice cream case at a Maverick, kept adding gas, couldn't find the leak. Went out there, and some condensing units, they have a port on your liquid line, right? After your filter dryer sight glass before it drops through the roof. There's also a port right on your discharge. I checked the difference. I was running like 100 PSI on my liquid line and 430 PSI on my discharge with a 12-degree temp drop on my filter dryer. And the tech that had been out there was like, I don't get it. Like the sight glass is full. I can't find a leak anywhere. My pressure's just so low. If he had just checked the other port, I ended up having to replace the compressor, the filter dryer, because it fried the compressor sitting there running at 430 PSI. They cranked the high pressure control up. So like we talked about earlier with superheat stuff is, I think it was Rory that mentioned, like, know what your state's supposed to be, know what part of the system you're checking, and what the other parts of the system are supposed to be doing as well.
So in your service call here, it said, filter dryer was a little, temperature difference. What are you considering to be, a temperature split enough there to be replaced?
I mean,
That's me.
I recommended it in this service call. The tech recommended it. The big point of that was he didn't check that on the initial visit, right? He found that on the callback visit. He didn't check superheat on the initial visit, and he didn't check his filter dryer on the initial visit. Everything else he did really good, but he missed two small things, which ended up in a callback.
So is it like 3-degree temperature difference or 5 or 10 that maybe you would consider mentioning?
I usually say like a couple degrees, like I'll like mention it, like, hey, like this should be done, but not like emergency situation. I'm probably not gonna do it on overtime unless they're like, just go ahead and do it. I don't want you back here. I just want it done now, so I don't have to worry about it.
Right.
But same thing, if you're doing a PM, I mean, honestly, how many of our guys doing a PM when they're going around and they're checking contactors, they're making sure the coils are clean, they're making sure the time clocks are at the right time of the day and working properly? I mean, how many of our guys really, in all honesty, are throwing a temp clamp on the filter dryer? Just something to think about, because we all have different experience levels, right? And I can guarantee there are people on this call that thought has probably not even crossed their mind to do on a PM. So
It's
just
never crossed mine, Dustin.
I believe it, Brad.
I didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely
I mean,
right.
it happens. You get in a routine of doing something and you miss it a few times, and before long, you're not checking it anymore until all of a sudden it's 10-degree, 15-degree plugged and not feeding refrigerant anymore.
And you change out all the wrong stuff, and then you figure it out, then you check it every time.
Yeah. So my voice is like super gone. I'm gonna go grab a drink really quick, but someone want to start by reading us what I wrote down for subcooling? Or I guess before we move on, are there any other questions regarding specifically superheat? Everyone's good? Everyone feels like they got a good understanding of superheat?
So far, everybody go get a drink.
Christian, you want to start reading subcooling? Grab a drink and take this call?
Sure.
Or we can take 5 minutes if you guys want to. What do you guys want to do? You want to keep going or take 5?
Take 5.
Okay.
Wake Shane up.
Those filters at Albertsons too, the low filters and such filters, they all need to be changed.
I figured they did.
And can tell you that we've been busy.
Got a temperature split?
Well, hell, pressure.
Huh? Pressure? Yeah, that's what I
Some
meant.
of them are like 15.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
So there is suction cord still in there, huh?
Well, I don't know if they're in there, but something's in there.
Roll back. Do we know if Albertsons even wants them in there? I know like Fred Meyers doesn't want suction cords in. After like startup, same with Costco.
I put 'em in.
Yeah.
Even Costco's like at home, you always put them in.
Huh.
Unless you're a startup guy and you just get cardboard in there.
There you go. That's probably what's in these. Collapsed. Plugged up to the other side.
But I told Damien about it. So next time we do the PM, this guy called Pat. Let Pat know I'm gonna buy everything, change it. But I'm the other guy for that.
This is awesome, guys.
Your guys' class is more interesting to school, so I'm recording school. I'll go back and watch it later.
You're awesome, Travis. You're awesome.
Hey, you know, I had all these books, right? All.
What?
No, this is in the apprenticeship.
Oh.
For the union, it's all my union books.
Might be able to pull some good information out of them for these classes. Then.
We got Copeland books, Anderson books, Spartan books.
Person's having that. I signed everybody up for it.
Did you? Sweet.
Thermal. Cool. I think it was thermal.
Hey, Travis,
Yeah.
when is that class in Falls? Is it because I got a thing and it said it was the end of this month, but you said it was first part of next month.
Yeah, I think they're in March. I'll follow up with thermal supply, but I'll have to look. One of them's a Manitowoc class and one of them's a Sportland class.
Okay, I'm leaving to Hawaii on the 9th. So.
Okay. I'll look. Follow up, let everybody know. I'll have to see if I can get all the new employees signed up or if it's too late. I know the classes were filling up pretty quick.
I appreciate it. I just thought I'd bring it up while we had a quiet time.
We saved the reading. Okay. How's your voice feeling?
So where I feel like I'm yelling, but I also feel like I don't really know how well everyone else can hear, so.
Yeah. That mic on that speaker actually does pretty good.
I'm pretty old, so I can't hear worth a crap.
What's that?
I can hear it. I know. I can't fucking hear a goddamn thing.
Are we like
What
on
was
a break?
5 minute, yeah. I don't know when I said 5 minutes, but
Dustin, was that you?
Yeah, I just wanted to be like you, Shane.
Was that Shane that burped?
No, that one was me.
Yeah, this is just how much farther you did earlier. That was impressive.
That was pretty rough.
It was long too, though.
I like an AirPod good all of a sudden. Shane, what's for dinner?
Tostitos salsa,
Oh, nice.
some chips.
I have no idea. What are you eating there, Dylan?
It was Aylin. It was my kid. She just heard Shane and got excited.
Who was that?
Crock pot
it's Aylin.
chicken.
Who's your mom?
Oh, is that Squishy? What's
Yeah.
up, Squishy?
Corn, beans, chips, hot sauce, sour cream.
Nice.
I love you.
Hey, Dustin, I wanted to ask you a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. That little service call scenario where it's like 80 degrees today and then it's -10 and snowing tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen headmasters fail in the summertime where they're just stuck in bypass and the head pressure's through the roof. And then I've seen headmasters in wintertime where they're not bypassing and they're stuck in the feeding into the condenser coil. Is there a way to test those to see if they're actually working before they fail? Or is it just like,
I mean, I don't know necessarily before they fail, but like you can like simulate. I don't know how to simulate like a freezing cold condition, but you can definitely simulate like a higher temp condition. Unplug the fans, block the condenser, etc.
Try and get some ice water in a Hudson sprayer and spray it on the condenser. If it's a small enough condenser.
Cut the cap tube on it and install a fan cycle switch.
For sure.
Has it been 5 minutes? Is everyone ready?
Let's go, yeah. It's 7:22.
Okay, so subcooling, like we talked about superheat, subcooling is a decrease in temperature below saturation. In the refrigeration cycle, subcooling is an important process that ensures liquid refrigerant enters the expansion device. Key takeaways: superheat occurs in the evaporator to protect the compressor, and subcooling occurs in the condenser to protect the expansion device. Refrigerant is usually subcooled between 10 and 20 degrees at the outlet of the condenser. An improper subcooling value can indicate various system problems, including overcharge, undercharge, liquid line restriction, insufficient condenser airflow, or water flow when using water-cooled condensers. Subcooling can tell, much like superheat, can tell you a lot about how the system is operating. Where's my mouse at? So here, like we talked about, we got our little diagram. Here's our little outdoor unit, our condenser coil. Here's our vapor line here, our liquid line here. So you got 105 degree saturated condensing temp and a 93 degree liquid line temp. Like we were talking about how it's swapped with superheat. Usually with superheat, you're doing your line temp minus your saturated converted. In this scenario, you're doing your saturated converted, which is the 105, minus your line temp. So that's what, like 8 degrees in that scenario? Let me find my mouse. Low subcooling.
That's how I leak detector in the trash.
That's how I look on Friday at 3 o'clock.
Yeah. This guy's like, I really don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm gonna leak check this thing. Low subcooling is an indication that not enough refrigerant is contained or packed in the condenser. This can be due to undercharge, poor compression, or an oversized metering device, or a device that's failing open or overfeeding. High subcooling. High subcooling is an indication that more than the designed amount of refrigerant is backing up or packed into the condenser. This can be caused by overcharge restriction, such as a contaminated line dryer or kinked liquid line. An undersized or failing closed metering device. Here's kind of like a diagram here. Here's our compressor, here's our discharge, becoming liquid in our discharge and our condenser. Here's our liquid header, liquid line, metering device. This is where heat is absorbed in the evaporator. And vapor back through our suction line, back to our compressor. How to check subcooling. Gauge up to the high side of the system, discharge, and convert to temperature. That's your saturated condensing temp. This 404A system has a discharge pressure of 272, which converts to 110 degrees. Using your temp clamp, record the line temp on the droplet or outlet of the condenser / liquid. This temperature is 95 degrees. It gives us a subcooling of 15 degrees. Let's see what I put over here. We got high temperature.
Why do we take subcooling?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I mean, I said, why do we take the subcooling? Because a lot of people take it, but they don't know reasons why they take it or what they should be looking for.
Dylan, you're an HVAC guy, and I know your mouth's full of food, but you want to answer this one?
Always done that for refrigerant charge on like a split system.
Anyone else have thoughts?
Make sure you're rejecting the heat.
Dustin,
Christian said to
telling
make
me
sure you're
that-
rejecting the heat.
You're stacking with.
Dustin,
Unit.
Sure, you're stacking liquid with your condensing unit.
I thought you said like over the summer that checking subcool on coolers and freezers is pointless because like most of your subcooling's lost in the receiver.
It's not necessarily pointless, but on one of these slides here, because a receiver stacks refrigerant, right? Like in this scenario here, you picture like your outdoor condenser on like an AC unit, there's no receiver, right? Your refrigerant's either line set, the evaporator, or the condenser.
Well, on an AC, that's like it's normally they would say like 8 to 12 degrees subcooled liquid because that's what the TXVs indoor require to work properly. Because those TXVs are also non-adjustable.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it also talks about like overcharge and undercharge with subcooling, right? But if you have a system with a receiver on it, you can sit there and add more gas to it, right? It's going to fill up your receiver before it affects your pressure, really, you know? You're not going to be, if you have a low receiver level or a 20% receiver level, you can add gas until that receiver is full and not really see a change in head pressure because you have that receiver. Does that make sense? So it's not that it's not important or not like accurate to check or that it's worthless. It's that with it, when you have a receiver, there's more room other than the condenser for the refrigerant to stack. So if you have a system like an AC unit there that has a proper charge, if you throw an extra 5 pounds in it, your head pressure is going to go through the roof, right? But if you have a system with a receiver and you add an extra 5 pounds, unless you have so much that your receiver's all the way full and then you start building head pressure before you really see that change in subcooling. Yeah, Christian wants to add on to that.
Some manufacturers, even with low and medium temp refrigeration circuits, they still have a subcooling standard, depending on how their application or their circuit's set up. You can get a subcooling, degree, but it's going to be before your receiver. So your liquid line is going to be between your receiver and your condensing coil. Your discharge is between your compressor and your inlet side of your coil. Yeah, it's going to stack up in the receiver, and you're not going to get an inappropriate, subcooling measurement after the receiver because of that. But if you're looking for a true answer, and again, it just depends on the manufacturer, their specification, whatever they want, you're going to want to check that before the receiver. gonna be the best spot for it.
Good feedback.
May not be necessary completely, you know, like Dustin's saying, but it's still there.
Mm-hmm. Laren, you asked the question. Do you have an answer you have in your mind that wasn't answered by anyone?
Well, no, but it is, I think to Dylan's point is it's what I've been thinking is usually cap tubes, your metering device determines what usually you need to go by. So when you're charging a critical system, so therefore, if I have a receiver system, it's not critical. But if I have a TXV, so superheat is now being adjusted for. So then that's how you can tell how full you are or what the proper charge is you look at manufacturer's subcooling level. But as far as that goes, it all really depends on what kind of metering device you have. And that's the reason why you check subcooling.
Thank you, Larry. Matt?
Tell Gordon to check his board. Oh, it's good.
Jaylen, are you still on the meeting? Gordon? Superheat and subcooling. Let's look at a few scenarios where checking both superheat and subcooling can help us understand and diagnose the system. And I included a link to something. I'm gonna have to look at my screen again. High superheat and high subcooling indicates a problem with the metering device restricting too much. Now, this is like what we were talking about. This is actually fun. I think this is information I pulled off that link that I posted. Keep in mind that subcooling won't necessarily increase on systems with a liquid line receiver, as extra liquid will fill the receiver instead of backing up in the condenser. Low superheat, high subcooling is an indication that the system is overcharged. High superheat, low subcooling is an indication the system is low on charge. Low superheat, low subcooling is an indication that the metering device is feeding too much. Superheat is telling you what's going on in the evaporator. High superheat equals starved evaporator, low superheat equals flooded evaporator. Subcooling is telling you what is going on in the condenser. High subcooling equals flooded condenser, low subcooling equals starved condenser. Make sense?
Absolutely clear as mud.
Hey, check
then
the
I-
comments. Dylan just put a really good chart up there for you.
Let's see my messages here.
Yeah, if you search 5 pillars of refrigeration, it's from HVAC school. It's got a cool chart.
So here's Dylan's little chart that he shared, and he shared it on our team on the chat for this meeting, so anyone should be able to access it. Thank you, Dylan.
You can also ask Siri or Google or even watch a YouTube video.
Yeah. So then I kind of just left it blank screen for open discussion, questions, comments, feedback. If anyone wants to clarify or ask anything,
I have something, I guess.
Matt.
So say, like a rack system, some cases you don't necessarily adjust by superheat, but more by discharge air temp. Is that correct or not?
Like, what do you mean? Like adjust?
Make your adjustments as far as not really say 6 to 8, but more or less by the discharge air temp.
I always go off of the line temp and I never really go off of your discharge air temp.
No. Okay.
I mean, in theory, like it probably does fluctuate with it, right? Usually like the colder your superheat is, the colder your coil is, so the colder your discharge air is gonna be.
Yeah.
But for me, like, why not just go like right to the source and get the accurate information rather than trying to determine what your temperature rise from your evaporator to your discharge area is and how to make that adjustment.
Gotcha.
Does the captain have anything he wants to add?
No, I'd like you to go over the TXV kits that we have here and the breakdown of parts of an expansion belt.
Okay. You wanna pull them out and we can, Matt can hold them up, or Matt or White or someone can hold them up there by the screen?
How many of you guys have the TXV build kits on your van? No?
I do.
If you don't, let's go ahead and get a part number. You got the black kit?
Yeah, I got the black kit. You need me to send you over those numbers again?
Yeah. So in the kit.
Okay, tomorrow
Get the-
morning I'll get in there.
Okay,
Or any of you guys can reach out to me. I'll give you the part numbers.
so what does Wyatt have in his hand?
This is what meters.
Might need to get closer to the
That's how
camera.
you gauge up by the.
And when power head activates and opens, pushes. And it'll-
An expansion valve body,
Security system.
and you can see the screen that we talked about earlier there on the side of it.
Can you point that out?
Where's
the screen at?
Good.
Your hand's blocking it.
And we,
Can we make that to where everybody can see it?
vacuum pump oil. We get vacuum pump oil under the gaskets and just stick it in there.
I think Matt asked a question that I was interested in too. What is your guys' process of cleaning the screen once you pull it out?
I use degreaser, hold it up to a light, like any store has light or skylight. If I see light through it, perfect, it's clean. If I can't, or it's got spots, I just say with degreaser. Or I like to just have extras in my tool bag,
Place them up, you can't even clean it up.
pull them out and just put new ones in. I don't give a shit.
Just do it quick.
Or what do you have there? You wanna,
These are cartridges
okay,
that just,
what do they do?
pull my chart up. Basically, it's like, I think yellows are half ton, blues are ton.
Should say on there, right?
No, it just says quantity.
Oh, it's right here.
I think
So,
blues.
You
yeah.
wanna
so
pass some
you're-
of those
you
up to
got
Christian to show in front of the camera?
A's, you got double A's, you got an A, B, C. Some of your guys like Ken or Matt over in Eastern Idaho, they do have the rebuild kit, so if you're ever interested in seeing one, but I would highly suggest that we get these on the vans. It's a time saver. And it's building an expansion valve on site. Sizing it up, usually based off your model number of your evaporator coil, right, or your compressor.
What I'll do is I'll take the numbers off the TSV,
All right,
reference them to Superheat, and it'll tell you.
you wanna show the camera close?
So off of the power head, it will tell you, right, it's a AA or,
Well,
It's not one way.
if they're not, if a cocksucker needs to replace the valve and not put the tag on, then you can pump everything down and take the power head off and you can see what cartridge is in there.
that's an important part too. He's got the tag. He just pulled out of that box. Always wrap that around that cap tube of the from the power head. What is a power head?
It's full of, let me see that power head. I wish I had my truck here because I have an old TXV with power head. And you can break them. That one's probably bad, so it'd be perfect. But I want to burn a new one.
Sorry.
Basically, it just has, it has gas in here. And the gas changes the tension on the spring, the temperature, and it either opens or closes the valve.
So you're spraying that power head?
Well, right here. It's not really a spring.
Bellow.
Yeah, it just pushes.
Push down on the two lifters on the side.
So we can show these guys too up close.
And it's power head valve, and you stick the penny in there to get you to the 90.
The nice part of these rebuild kits is you might even have to call a manufacturer or someone to verify like the proper tonnage and everything. But almost every expansion valve you might encounter, you're gonna be able to rebuild in the field. You're not gonna need to wait for parts down to tell you that that one expansion valve that Charleston or whoever is gonna buy from Sporlan anyways, with the 12-week lead time. When you have one of these kits and you get the right, make sure you have it sized right, put the right cartridge in, the right power head on, you can pretty much replace any expansion valve that you need to. There's different body types, there's straight through valves, angle valves. So these kits are very handy, and one, you're able to do it while you're there, so the customer doesn't have to wait for crazy lead time. And, it's just nice to be able to have it and be able to say, hey, rather than waiting for Parts Town or RSD to build me a quote, I'm able just to build what I need right here and be able to replace the expansion valve if I need to.
RSD.
I'm gonna order one tomorrow, that's cool.
Let's get can send us the part number on that chat with the black kits. I like those Q body black kits better.
Yeah, these things.
And they're a little bulkier than these blue ones, but they got some styrofoam in it, and they have some other, they've got other information inside of them, like some pads and stuff too.
And the kits come with the oil too, right?
Comes with the oil.
And make sure you
So
oil
Travis-
your heads before you put your power heads on.
When we use parts out here, can we just?
I'm in my van and I get on sport.
You just tell them, you just say, hey, I replaced.
What'd you say, Ken?
KT 42 so you can get it.
I said I'm in my van right now and I guess I have the blue kit instead of the black kit, which I thought I still had the black kit on this van, but I don't.
First, I'll spray it.
Yeah, we can get a part number from RSD and get it to everybody. I know it's expensive, but really, this is a kit that's gonna get you out of pretty much any bind when you encounter an expansion valve. So we'll try to get that
I can
part
look through
number.
my text with Travis and see if I have those numbers too, because I've sent it to him a few times.
And then, I don't know who asked the question, but someone asked like, how do we bill for this? You get the price of what that valve would be and you bill it individually. Then you go back to RSD and restock your kit.
Yeah, you'd have to bill it out as the valve body, the power head, and the cartridge. You know, all that pricing from RSD. Who has the RSD app on their phone?
I do.
You guys can set up an account with your email address and with our company account number. And you can look up whichever location you're at, and it'll tell you whether or not they have it in stock. And it'll tell you also our company price.
How accurate is that?
Very accurate. Really? They also tell you what they have in stock. You can search their website and find out if the part you need is available in Boise or Pocatello. Karen, if you have
Can we
our
get that
RSD,
account number?
would you mind sending it in this chat?
If you go to my account that I gave you, Terrence, it'll tell you our account number.
I think it's like RSD mobile or something like that.
Customer numbers are on our.
Mhm.
So, other than that, I mean, this course that you do is very thorough. It's a lot of information. So like I said, you guys leave from here today. If you have questions, your team leads are probably your first, go-to person. Dustin's leading the class. He's very knowledgeable in refrigeration. You can come to me too. Again, like these, I'm excited to do these types of classes with you guys because I'm learning too, So.
I thank all you guys too. Like, I know we all took time out of our evening to be here, but like, it's been a year since we went over this last, and so even just like reading through it's always a good refresher. So I hope this was valuable to everybody. And again, and hopefully this gets your guys' brains thinking too of other things you guys want to learn more about, or things that you struggle with that we as a team can come together and like share information. And I'm really excited to do some of the hands-on training. So just wanted to thank everyone again for taking the time to join and be here.
I do know. Is Shane still on? Yeah. Hey, Shane.
What up?
So you had the Nissan. Did you take all that stuff out when you took it out? You should have one of those black cases.
That should still be on the van. So to be honest, like there was still a lot of your stuff on the van or stuff that was stocked. So I'm more or less just threw all my tools in there and then just worked out of it. And then when I was done, I just pulled my tools out. So I want to say that there was a TXB black kit. If you go through the back door, look to the left, bottom shelf, I think that's where it was at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it was the last van I seen it on.
I never knew how long I was going to be in that van and that it was yours. So I just kind of left the back half of the van as it was.
Does anyone have any other questions or even anything like slightly related, slightly just on their mind?
I know it's kind of putting you on the spot, but can you come up with 5 questions based off of your,
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just,
maybe close that screen and skim through it real
yeah,
quick?
that's what I was gonna do.
I'm gonna turn on the lights. Close your eyes.
Okay, so let's see here.
Pick on
Okay,
some people.
so let's pick on. Hey, Ethan, are you on? Hey, Joel, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you, I guess question number 1, give us some examples of what causes low and what causes high superheat?
Be restrictions.
Causes what, high or low?
Restriction would cause high, I believe.
Okay, what about like an iced up coil?
Probably cause low.
Okay,
That
does someone else? Does someone else say something? Okay. Okay, question number 2. For Brody, what do most compressor manufacturers recommend as a minimum superheat?
Low temp or medium temp?
Is it 10?
Say what?
Is it 10 for the superheat?
Higher.
12?
20.
Oh, 20. Wow.
That's just to protect the compressor essentially. 20 degrees of
Right.
superheat is what most compressor manufacturers say for minimum superheat, low or medium temp. Questions. Okay, let's say you have high superheat reading. What are some things you're going to check before adjusting the expansion valve? Matt Garabrandt?
I only have airflow.
What else?
you say one more time?
What are some things that you'll check before adjusting the expansion valve if you have high superheat?
Airflow, we got. You said the low superheater?
High superheat.
High?
Mm-hmm. One of them was something that was held up in front of the camera for everyone to see.
Oh, yeah, well, restrictions, I guess.
Yeah, but what specifically?
TXV
TXV what?
filter.
Screen? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, what's another good question? Anyone else have a question they want answered?
Pinch line. Pinch line.
Yeah. Cody, what's a good question you can think of to ask someone in the group?
You asked pretty good questions.
Okay, Wyatt, what is low superheat, low subcooling? I guess a symptom of.
Well, you would have your compressor flood because that would be a oversurge of refrigerant.
Okay, so low superheat would be overfeeding evaporator, right? What about low subcooling?
Start condenser.
Okay, so in that scenario, having a flooded evap coil and a starved condenser is an indication that your metering device is overfeeding.
Awesome.
Cool. Those are kind of, I don't know, I don't know if those are the best questions or not, but I feel like I've been talking nonstop for the last 2 hours, so.
Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You did a great job, Dustin.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Yeah, hope you guys all have a good evening. Hopefully we come up with something just as exciting in March.
Shane said something about like a cold tech calendar
What?
with all the guys.
Yeah, I think I got dibs on August because that's my birthday month and I have the perfect Speedo for it.
Hey, dude, we ought to do a quick
Sweet.
introduction of all the new people so we can see their pie holes.
Yeah, go ahead. Dylan, you're already right there rubbing your eyes. So before you fall asleep, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
I'm not new, but nobody knows me.
I'm Dylan.
Where you from?
So, are there like certain things I'm supposed to say? Favorite color?
Yeah,
Red.
whatever. What's your boat?
I like snowboarding, skateboarding, and this trade. Yeah.
Cool. Who else is new?
I am.
We got Brody, Ivan.
All right, Brody, you're up.
Howdy, y'all.
Hi, Brody.
Dude,
I
we
don't
know
know.
you from Sonic.
That's right. I'm the Sonic Man.
Not anymore.
I
Now
don't know.
you're
That
Long
must
walks on
mean-
the beach, you know.
We're all
A nice
assuming
boat.
now you're the hot side master. Is that right? You're the hot side and ice cream machine master, is what I hear.
Yeah. Yeah,
Come to Boise.
definitely. I prefer hot side, anything HVAC related. I mean, RTUs and whatnot. And yeah, I got to get a lot of experience on ice cream machines. I remember Shane had to go one night and the freaking handle was upside down and it was not hitting a switch to turn on the cooling. I believe it was. I can't really remember. And I was like,
Dude,
holy
yeah,
crap.
some jackass put the handle on backwards or some shit. I was so pissed.
Dude. But
Well,
yeah.
Matt and Cody are
Probably
standing here
can.
saying, come to Boise, because they don't know what the heck they're doing regarding hot side and ice cream machines. So
For sure.
Outside. Now you got Ethan.
Ethan, do you want to introduce yourself as well as your mustache?
Yeah,
Just want me to wait now.
My father's Dustin Larson, not the beard.
Not me, everyone. The other Dustin. He is not my child.
Hey, I want to support.
Real good. Hamburger.
Don't turn on damn light. That I like this trade and
This is mine.
You enjoying it so far?
Yeah, I'm enjoying it.
You learning a lot?
Yes, I am.
Cool. Well, glad you're on the team.
For the last 2 weeks, I feel like I've learned a lot through this trade. A lot more to the commercial than residential.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Ivan, I'm sure a lot of people don't know who you are. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Howdy, y'all. Ivan. Nice to meet everybody. I'm pretty new to the trade. I'm enjoying it so far. Work with a great group of people. So, yeah, it's nice to meet everybody.
Awesome. Well, glad you guys are all here. Look forward to growing our team with you guys. Love the positivity everyone brings and the willingness to learn. And, you know, I feel like 2022, I'll be honest, before you guys here, I think 22 kicked all of our asses pretty hard. But we've been working hard to build a good culture and a good team and want to just keep moving forward, and feel like we've got a lot of guys in the right places to make that happen. So appreciate you guys all being here.
Hey, Dustin, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, I know you had that presentation. Are you guys taking every single one of those sheets, or at least emailing that out to us, so we can always have that as a review to go through?
I can email you my slideshow if you guys want.
Yeah, that'd be good. I'm a very visual person.
Awesome.
I tend to learn that way, so it's always nice to have something back on.
And here's kind of my thought for March, if everyone's okay with it. But I built a little trainer here in Boise that's like a walk-in freezer, you know, kind of electrical circuit. You know, it's got, you know, defrost timer, thermostat, fan motor, quote unquote compressor, etc. And I thought it would be a good thing to do to, one, take it all apart and wire them up as a group, have you guys over in East Iowa stuff, build one of your own to do at the same time, as well as draw a wiring diagram from it and try to understand a wiring diagram. Because I know electrical is a big struggle for some guys. So if everyone's okay with it, knowing that it's in March and I have time to work with Matt and that on getting one built for East Idaho, are you guys all okay with doing that for March?
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think that's a great idea.
So we'll plan on the second Thursday in March, which is the 9th. I believe I have this meeting set up to reoccur on the second Thursday of every month. So hopefully everyone sees that. And let's just plan on doing this again then.
Sounds good.
And so then we'll actually go to Idaho Falls, right? With us East Idaho guys, I guess.
Yeah, Matt said you guys can all spend the night at his house with you if you guys want.
I call the sofa in the living room.
Sleepover.
Always.
Cool. Well, thank you guys.
That's you, me, Shane.
Oh, okay. I'll come to your house and snuggle with you, Ken.
Sounds good. I get
Just
to be
don't warm up the car in the
you know,
driveway.
the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go before my wife gets jealous. So.
Thanks,
All right.
Dustin.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Dustin.
have a good evening, guys.
Dustin.
Bye.
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 Thanks, guys.